There was a time when letters traveled slower than seasons, when a word written in January might not find its reader until summer. It was the age of sails and storms, when love lived in folded parchment and the faith of those who waited by the sea. In those days, patience was not a virtue, it was a way of survival. In the small port town of Foy, on the Cornish coast of England, lived Margaret Hale, a schoolteacher of modest means and gentle voice. Her days began with the sound of gulls and ended with the toll of the harbor bell. Her father, once the keeper of the lighthouse, had passed away years before, leaving her the small stone cottage that faced the sea, a place where the salt never quite left the air and every night brought the echo of distant foghorns. The year was 1851, the height of the merchant shipping era. The harbor of Foy bustled with trade, barrels of tea and sugar, crates of spices from India, and the rough laughter of sailors who knew the world better than most priests. It was in that world that Margaret met Elias Ward, a merchant navigator who had served with the Royal Navy before taking to the commercial trade routes that connected Britain to its colonies. Elias was not a man of poetry or promises. He was broad-shouldered, sun-weathered, with a quiet way of speaking that suggested he had seen things the land could not explain. He first came to her classroom to deliver a letter of donation from a ship's benefactor, a sailor's fund for the education of seafarers' children. She thanked him politely, expecting never to see him again. But he returned, again and again, each time finding a new excuse, to borrow a book, to ask about her students, to bring word from the sailors. Over time, the two began to share quiet evenings by the harbor. He told her of Calcutta's heat, of Lisbon's steep hills, of the silent beauty of the South Atlantic. She spoke of her father, who used to light the beacon at Gribbon Head, and how she often dreamed of the ships finding their way home through his light. They were both, in their own ways, people of the sea, one who left and one who stayed. Their affection grew slowly, almost shyly. They never called it love. They simply understood each other, two souls standing at the edge of the world, learning to read silence as clearly as speech. When he finally told her that his ship, the Perseverance, would sail again to the East Indies and might not return for over a year, she did not cry. She only said, "Then I shall count the days by the tides." Before he left, he handed her a small, brass telescope, battered and scratched from years at sea. "So you can watch for me," he said. She smiled faintly and replied, "And so you'll know someone is watching." The ship departed at dawn on a cold March morning. The wind howled through the rigging, and Margaret stood on the pier until the sails disappeared into the grey horizon. In the months that followed, life in Foy carried on as it always had, children reciting lessons, ships arriving and departing, the gossip of wives carried on the wind. But for Margaret, every morning began with the same ritual. She would climb the cliff behind her cottage, lift the telescope, and scan the horizon for a speck of white sail. At first, the letters came steadily. Elias's handwriting was neat, deliberate, a sailor's hand used to making words survive rough voyages. He wrote from ports whose names seemed like stories themselves: Cape Town, Mauritius, Bombay. He described storms, foreign tongues, the endless sound of water against wood. He ended every letter the same way, "Until the next tide, yours in patience." Her replies traveled the same route in reverse, folded carefully, sealed with wax, entrusted to whatever ship might be heading east. Sometimes they took 6 months to arrive, sometimes more. Still, she wrote. The rhythm of writing became the rhythm of her heart, but then, one winter, the letters stopped. At first, she thought little of it, delays were common, and storms could hold back entire fleets. But as the months passed, a quiet dread began to grow. The postmaster, a kind old man named Mr. Fuller, could no longer meet her eyes when she came to ask. "Still no word, "Miss Hale," he would murmur. She would nod, thank him, and walk home through the fog. By the second year, even hope began to feel like a burden. Rumors reached the port that the Perseverance had gone missing after leaving Bombay, last sighted near the coast of Madagascar. Many believed it had gone down in one of the summer cyclones that swept across the Indian Ocean that year. Margaret refused to believe it. Ships were lost all the time, she told herself, only to return months or even years later, battered but alive. She kept the telescope by her window and the last letter he had sent on her desk, its edges soft from being read 100 times. Life around her moved on. The children she once taught grew into sailors themselves, the town's younger women married and left, steamships began to appear alongside the old sailing vessels. Margaret remained where she was, not waiting for a miracle, but unwilling to close a door that had never been shut. 5 years passed. Then 6. By then, the world had changed. The telegraph had arrived in London, messages could cross countries in minutes. Yet in that small corner of Cornwall, the pace of life was still measured by the tides. One autumn evening, when the wind carried the smell of rain and kelp, a stranger knocked on her door. He was an old sailor, stooped and scarred, with eyes that seemed to have seen too much. He carried a parcel wrapped in waxed canvas. "From a wreck," he said simply. "Off the coast of Madagascar. They said it was yours to have." Inside the parcel was a leather-bound journal, salt-stained, its pages swollen and discolored. The name Elias Ward was barely legible on the inside cover. Margaret read through it slowly, her fingers trembling over each word. The last entries spoke of storms, violent, relentless, tearing through sails and hope alike. The final page read, "We have lost the mainmast. The men are weary, but I still see her light in my mind, the one who waits by the western shore. If the sea claims me, let her know she was my compass home." That night, Margaret climbed the hill behind her cottage, where the lighthouse her father once tended still stood abandoned. She lit a small lantern and placed it on the window ledge, its glow trembling against the rain. She whispered his name, not as a cry, but as a prayer, and left the light burning until dawn. After that, the townspeople often saw the glow of a lantern in her window each night, long after the rest of the harbor slept. They began to call it the widow's beacon, though no one had ever seen her wear a ring. She never corrected them. She continued teaching, continued walking to the cliffs each evening, continued writing letters, though no ship would ever carry them. In time, she grew old. Her hands, once steady with a pen, began to tremble, her hair turned the color of the fog that rolled in from the sea. Yet her eyes still carried the same calm determination. She no longer waited for a ship, yet she never stopped watching the horizon. When asked why she kept the light burning, she would only smile and say, because someone, somewhere, might still be finding their way. The winter of 1880 was particularly harsh. Storms battered the coast for weeks, and the lighthouse keepers struggled to keep the lanterns lit. One morning, when the weather finally cleared, the townsfolk noticed that Margaret's lantern had gone dark. When a neighbor entered her cottage, they found her seated by the window, her telescope resting in her lap, her face turned peacefully toward the sea. The journal of Elias Ward lay open beside her, the ink faded to pale ghosts of blue. She was buried beside the cliffs, where the wind carried both salt and memory. And though decades have passed, the sailors who still pass that stretch of coast swear that, on certain nights when the sea is calm and the moon low, a faint light flickers near the old lighthouse, a light that burns for a few moments and then disappears, as though answering a call from somewhere far away. In time, her story became legend. Some said she was mad, others called her a saint of the sea. But among those who understand the loneliness of distance, she became something more, a symbol of endurance, of the quiet strength that once defined love before the world grew impatient. Now, when people speak of her, of Margaret Hale of Foy, they say she was a woman who believed that love was not measured by the nearness of hands, but by the constancy of heart. That, in the age of ships, waiting was not weakness but devotion. And perhaps that is why, even now, when the tide turns beneath the same stars she once watched, it feels as though the world pauses for a moment, remembering a woman who taught the sea itself the meaning of faith, because the art of waiting, she had once written in her final unsent letter, was never about time. It was about believing that love, once true, never drifts beyond reach, only beyond sight.